Hello, dear viewer. I hope you've already subscribed by clicking the bell so you don't miss new parts or new stories. Enjoy the story and of course have fun watching it. Dig Two Graves. Chapter 4.3. That was Jake's room they went into, Bill adds quietly. It was the same night as the pictures. They were only in his room for 12 minutes. They were in his room during the time period the pictures were taken. If you want, I'll play the tape again, and you'll see that they even know about the security camera and do everything they can to make sure their faces are never in its view. Would you like me to replay the tape? Vicky looks at Susie, who is now clutching her hand more aggressively. She seems to have lost some more color. Vicky looks at me again and shakes her head. I have something else we want to show you, Bill explains. He reaches down again and pulls out another folder. These are your copies, Bill says, handing over the folder containing 2 sets of explosive images. He then switches the tape to 1:23 a.m. when the elevator doors first open. See the chrome trash can in the lower right corner? He asks. Neither of them says anything. This is important. Look, says Bill firmly. It's more of an order than a request. Susie looks and stops kneading her hands. Yes, I see, she says disappointedly. Look at the first picture. It's a snapshot of this frame on film. Throwing the photo on the table, they see pretty much the same thing they see on the TV screen. Now look at the second photo. This is an enlargement of the lower right corner of the first photo, Bill adds as I toss up another photo. The top rounded part of the chrome ashtray is clearly visible in the photo. Now look at the third picture, which is an enlargement of the second picture, says Bill. I look across the table at the photograph that now lies in front of Susie. The outline of the urn is gone, but the chrome images are visible. And the last thing is the enlargement of the third photo, Bill says. I looked again at the photograph lying in front of Susie. It showed 2 people in long coats. The smaller one on the right has curly hair, like Heidi's. The one on the left is a taller man. As we saw last night, the image is grainy, but at least it's clear to me who it is. It's not a very clear picture, Vicky states. It may be difficult to present in court, but I don't think it's necessary. It should only have validity in this room. And I think all 4 of us know exactly who it is. Susie lowers her eyes to her hands again. She seems to disengage. Susie, I add. We even found a prostitute in the photos. She won't sign the affidavit, but she'll come here. She identified Schmidt as the man who paid her. She says she was told it was all a prank. She will also say she thought I was drunk or something because I wasn't moving. She will also say that my pants were on the whole time and that we couldn't make love because I didn't even have an erection. I can hear Susie crying. Part of me remembers what we've been through together and desperately wants to go to her. But another part remembers what she's done lately and wants her to be in as much pain as I am. I realize Susie was right. I lied to myself that I wouldn't win at all costs. But so far, I found that I'm still losing. We're both going to lose. Vicky puts her hand on her shoulder and looks at me. She says that her client needs some time and that they will get back to us. It's kind of annoying. After everything I've been through, I want her to get down on her knees and beg me to forgive her. I'm about to say something when I feel Bill's hand on my arm. I look back at Susie, then at Vicky. Vicky says the word, "Please?" I nod. Bill and I get up and turn to leave. At the door, I stop and look around. "Susie," I finally say. She looks up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. I can feel my heart tearing in all directions, and I wonder if I should say anything else. I wave my hand dismissively and turn around without further ado. The door closes behind me with a loud click. Wednesday, 1 p.m. Bill and I are escorted to the same conference room where I met with the review committee on Monday. The same 5 people are present. I smile at Tom and Christy as I sit down and make room for Bill. Just before the meeting, I had a brief conversation with Tom Weston. He confirmed that he had mentioned Heidi's problem in his conversation with Hinckley. Heidi certainly had a personnel problem, and since Hinckley was the executive director of human resources, it was her department. He was surprised when I told him about Hinckley's personal involvement, and in great detail. Tom was able to confirm another fact as well. He recalled that Schmidt bought the last round of drinks for 2 reasons. First, because Schmidt had procrastinated so long, and second, he had actually noticed that the bottle of water that was on the tray had no cap. Christy clears his throat. trying to start the meeting. "Excuse me," Christy says. She stands up and reaches across the table. "I don't think we've been introduced to each other," she addresses Bill. "You must be Christy Evans. Mr. Vickers has told me a lot about you. I'm Bill Benner. Mr. Vickers has hired me as his attorney." "I see," she says solemnly. "Mr. Vickers," Christy says formally, "you are aware, of course, that you are forbidden outside representation." "I know I have a right to representation," I reply. "Yes, it is, but internal representation. It's not a court of law. We have to follow HR policies that do not allow outside interference. I do not believe it is possible for me to get impartial internal representation. Therefore, I need external representation. If you believe otherwise, I see no point in continuing this meeting at this time." I rise to my feet, followed quickly by Bill. Christy looks first at Tom, who nods, and then at Hinckley, who shrugs. "Mr. Vickers," Christy says dryly, "I have been appointed special counsel on this situation, and the partners have appointed me to handle this matter. An emergency meeting was held last night with all the partners of the company, as well as members of this committee. After much discussion, the decision was made to terminate your employment with the company. The severance offer sent to you on Monday is still valid, but only if you sign it now. You will also need to sign a document confirming that you will not take legal action against the company." I slowly sink back into my seat. "Was that decided last night?" I say with a hitch. No one answers my question. I cast a glance to my left, at Tom Weston, who is grimacing. At a glance, I realize that he was outnumbered at this meeting. I look directly at Christy, who has a slight mist in her eyes and is doing her best to keep her composure. This day isn't turning out quite the way I planned, I think to myself. I feel an emptiness inside, a sudden loss. I'd invested years of my life in this company, but I was forced to leave it on trumped-up charges by some damn fool. I glance to my right and meet my eyes with Schmidt. The shit-eating grin on his face is too much, or maybe just enough, to inflame my insides. I look back at Christy. It was determined on Monday that I have until noon today to submit to this board my response to the charges against me. The offer was made as a courtesy and didn't commit to anything, Christy says obediently. "Non-committal," Bill spoke up from my side. "Mr. Benner," Christy says quickly, "you have no standing in this meeting, and I will have to escort you out of the building if you cannot abstain." "Oh, shut up," Bill says, surprising everyone present, including me. "Geez, now, I distinctly remember why I didn't go into corporate law." "Mr. Benner," interrupts Christy. "You'll hear me now," Bill interrupted, "or you'll hear me in court, and I can assure you that what you'll hear in court, you won't like." Without waiting for a response, Bill begins to lay out all the initial allegations and evidence we have uncovered over the past 2 days. I really enjoyed sitting back and watching. I especially enjoyed watching Hinckley. She must have changed 5 or 6 shades from white to crimson red when her personal involvement in this scam was revealed. I especially liked the way she blushed when Bill explained how she used the information provided by Tom Weston to convince Heidi to sign the original document. But the best part was when he talked about the hidden print codes and pass data. Bill also emphasized that the emergency meeting held last night violated their policy regarding my termination. He also emphasized that my dismissal was based not only on trumped-up charges, but that senior management had violated criminal laws in creating the forged documents, and that company resources were used in the commission of the crime. "On the merits," Bill coined, "your original proposal is completely unacceptable. Then under the parameters defined in our meeting yesterday, I'm afraid we will have to withdraw our severance offer," Christy responds. "Great," Bill replies. "Your organization has done a great service to my client by withdrawing the offer. This opens the door for my client to pursue not only civil charges of wrongful termination, but criminal charges not only against the organization, but also against specific executives. However, given that my client has devoted a significant portion of his life to this organization and still has some affection for it, he is willing to consider an offer that is at least 250% higher than the severance offer you withdrew. As compensation, my client will agree not to file a civil suit against the organization, which he will easily win. My client will also not provide the district attorney with any information about the criminal actions. In addition, my client will sign a non-disclosure and non-competition agreement. However, my client reserves the right to sue individuals for wrongs done to him outside of the company's purview. Bill speaks nonstop for 15 minutes or more. His sudden silence leaves a verbal vacuum in the room. Christy cleared her throat. I'll need to present this to all the partners. I'm giving you until the end of business tomorrow. It will take me a few days just to prepare them, she objected. You have held 2 emergency meetings within 48 hours. I am confident that you will be able to hold 1 meeting within the next 36 hours. I will prepare our documents for filing with the court tomorrow. If I don't receive a satisfactory response from you by the end of business tomorrow, we will file our papers first thing Friday in civil court, Bill said firmly. How do I get in touch with you? Asks Christy. Bill pulls out a business card and holds it out across the table. Christy smiles and takes the card, then glances at Hinckley and Schmidt to his left. I'll need to see you both in my office right after this meeting. I'll start with you, Miss Hinckley. I have several meetings this morning. I can meet with you in the afternoon, Hinckley explains. Schmidt leans back nervously in his chair. No, Christy says. You can follow me into my office. If you need to cancel any appointments, my administrative assistant will do it for you. Christy looks to his right. Tom, would you mind walking Mr. Vickers and Mr. Benner to the door? Tom nods, and the meeting breaks up. Tom tells me with a chuckle that the other managing partners will easily agree to the new package once they see all the crap that's going on. We exchange thanks for our years of working together. He asks me to let him know where I get settled and not to be an outsider. And finally, he tells me he's not going to see me off. He figures I know where the door is and isn't too worried about me stealing the printer or anything else. We shake hands, and I see him heading quickly down the aisle, but not toward his office, but toward Christy's office. Bill and I laugh as we head for the door. So, you think you won, asshole? I hear behind me as we walk past the empty conference room. Wheeling around, I saw Schmidt leaning against the door jamb. Shouldn't you be taking your meds in Christy's office right now? I jab back. Fuck that shit, he laughs. You know they're going to fire you, I tease. That evidence you forged was good enough to be bad. So what? There are better paying jobs at dozens of other companies. Schmidt laughs and walks back to the conference room. I quickly start to follow him when Bill grabs my forearm. You don't want to do this, Jake, he warns. I have to do this, I say, and walk into the conference room, closing the door behind me. I walk right up to Schmidt. He's a few centimeters taller, but that doesn't scare me. You'll never get that partnership now, asshole. And anyway, you'll be lucky to stay out of jail. I fall to my knees and pain spreads across my face. I hadn't expected or seen the forearm smash into the bridge of my nose. Stunned, I hear him laugh. You've always been such a fucking wuss. A fucking lawyer wuss, he laughs. I try to clear my head, focus my vision. I'll tell you one thing, he continued. You're a good lawyer except for one thing. You don't see the big picture, or at least you don't see it as well as I do. I'm going to fucking kill you, I muttered. Schmidt laughs. You see, Vickers, you proved me right when you came here and started talking about partnership and evidence. Do you really think this was all about partnership? Of course it's a worm, I muttered. It's what you've been after all this time. It's how to fuck me too. Schmidt laughs again. There, you see. You're still proving my point. This had nothing to do with any fucking job. This was about your wife. Ever since I first saw her in college. I knew you could never appreciate an ass as good as hers. I knew that somewhere inside her there was a night butterfly just waiting to break free, and that I was the man who knew how to open her cage. Unfortunately, she didn't dignify me in college, but now she's sure of it. And you know, Vickers, I was right. And the way she begs me to feed her. God, she's hot. I have a friend whose buddy is even bigger than mine, and I talked her into trying it and letting me film it. If you want, I'll send you a copy. He laughs. You piece of shit, I hiss, my vision starting to come back into focus. You're a goddamn wuss, he growls. You don't get it, do you? You lost, asshole. I've been in your bed, making love to your wife every night since Friday. You cuckold. Do you know she begs me to give her more? She can't get enough. Hell, just a few hours ago I called her and told her I'd made lunch for her at my office. I can't put into words how good it felt as I buried my fingers in her hair, and we made love. It only took me a few days, asshole. To take your wife and turn her into my personal slave. I took your wife from a respectable ADA to a total slave. And you're the weakling who let me do it. I should do your wife a favor and just beat the shit out of your sorry ass." Then Schmidt leans in slightly and whispers, "And between you and me, she told me she likes my taste better than yours now." My vision suddenly clears in a blinding rage, and I dash away. Towering over him, I throw my head back and feel the back of my head smash into his nose. Leaning back as far as I can, I land the hardest punch I can, right in his groin. The loud blast of air and Schmidt's swearing was enough to send me staggering to my feet. I look down at Schmidt. He's bent over, holding his crotch with one hand and his bleeding nose with the other, cursing me, barely breathing. I don't hesitate. I smash my knee as hard as I can right into his face. Even as he covers his nose with his hand, his cry of pain only brings a smile to my lips. I allow myself a brief trace of satisfaction when Schmidt topples over onto his back, one hand holding his nose and the other holding his groin. "I just started making love to your life," I say. I want to punch him in the face. It takes all my strength to turn around and head for the door. Bill looks at me with a raised eyebrow. "You make a lawyer's life interesting," he says. "Are you okay?" "I've gotten better," I reply, gently touching the bridge of my nose. "But I'm not that bad." He smiles. "Let's get out of here." "One thing first," I say as he groans. "Seriously, I have to do this. Follow me, please." I walk the short distance to where the marketing department was located. I walk straight to Schmidt's office and have mixed feelings when I find his administrative assistant at his desk. She watches me approach her desk, a look of wariness and surprise on her face. "Betty," I begin, "I don't want to get you in trouble. I just want to know one thing. Was my wife here yesterday?" She looks at me and sighs. I close my eyes in pain as I see her nod. "She went into Schmidt's office?" She nods again. "Was the door locked?" She nods again. "Thank you, Betty. I appreciate your honesty." I look at Bill. "Come on, Bill," I say resignedly. "There's only one way to play this game now." Thursday, 11 a.m. As Bill and I take our seats, it is clear that the cluster bombs Bill dropped at yesterday's meeting did a lot of damage. There were only 4 of us at today's meeting. Bill was present as my representative, and only Tom Weston and Christy Evans represented my old company. "Where are the others?" I ask. "The Personnel Review Board has been cancelled because your employment situation has already been resolved by Jake," Christy says much less formally than the day before. "We're just discussing the terms of your severance package." I nod my head, realizing that behind the faint smile on Christy's face, much more was said than expressed. "Jake," Christy began, "after meeting with all the partners, your terms were accepted, except for the money part. They agreed to increase the amount to $3 million. I raise my eyebrows in surprise and look at Bill. "This proposal means only a 50% increase," Bill objected. "It's considerably less than the $5 million we're asking for." Christy looks at Bill. "That's our offer," she says simply. Bill and I look at each other. We both shrug as he pulls a folder out of his briefcase. Bill hands the folder to Christy. We watch as she opens it. She couldn't suppress the surprise that was reflected on her face. "What is this?" she exclaims. "You're suing for $10 million? That's double what you asked for yesterday." "As I said yesterday, our position is non-negotiable. You have executives who were included in the review process, falsified documents, worked on company time, and utilized company resources," Bill explains. "The entire process this firm undertook to fire my colleague was a conspiracy involving the most senior people in this firm. And if that wasn't enough, my client was physically assaulted in that building by one of your senior executives." "I am aware of the physical confrontation with Mr. Benner," Christy replies, shifting back to an official tone. "It's a matter of interpretation as to who attacked who," Christy says. Again, I see the slight trace of a smile in the corners of her eyes as she stares at the twin black eyes left by Schmidt's forearm in front of my nose. My client was simply defending himself. In fact, he was forced to do it from his knees after being hit by your vice president of marketing, Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt was acting on his own behalf. He was no longer employed by the firm. "Oh?" Bill replies. I assume you don't have former employees reviewed by the Personnel Committee. So, at the time of yesterday's meeting, Mr. Schmidt must have been employed by this firm. Since Mr. Schmidt assaulted my client immediately after the meeting, I see no other option but to conclude that he was still on the staff of this firm at the time of the assault. It remains a matter of interpretation as to who attacked whom. Miss Evans, Bill objected, I personally witnessed Mr. Schmidt's attack. I expect you to do nothing else but support your client, Christie says. I hope you are not accusing me, as a representative of the court, of inducing perjury. Besides, there is a second witness. A second witness? She says in surprise. Brad gets up and opens the door. Betty Higgins, Schmidt's administrative assistant who I talked to yesterday, enters the room looking very timid. Bill holds out a chair to her. She gratefully accepts the chair. Mrs. Higgins, Bill addresses her, I want to assure you that you are not under oath. I just have a few questions for you, and I would appreciate your honest answers. Betty nods. Were you standing next to me yesterday? At the entrance to conference room 15C? Yes, she says. Did you witness the altercation between Jake, Mr. Vickers, and your former boss, Mr. Schmidt? Continued Bill. Betty hesitates and looks first at Tom and then at Christie. Mrs. Higgins, I would personally appreciate it if you would tell the whole truth as you best remember it. There will be no negative consequences if you tell the truth, Christie assured her. Betty sighed and looked at Bill again. Yes, I saw that. Can you describe what you saw? Betty looks first at me, then at Christie, and finally back at Bill. I suppressed a chuckle, because it was obvious to me that Bill had hurt her somehow. I'd never known her to be in any way accommodating or obliging. Perhaps my opinion was somewhat biased, since I knew she was submissive to the scumbag. They, Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Vickers, started arguing, and then Mr. Schmidt just punched Mr. Vickers in the face, says Betty. Can you show me how? Interrupts Bill. Well, he used his forearm like this, she says, taking her hand and pretending to strike Bill on the top of his nose. Thank you, Betty, Bill says. Then what happened? Well, Mr. Vickers has fallen. That is, not all the way to the floor, but only to his knees. I could see he was stunned. Then Mr. Schmidt began to tell him horrible things about his wife. I mean Mr. Wicker's wife. Mr. Schmidt then said something about beating Mr. Vickers. He didn't use those exact words. There were a few swear words, but that's basically what Mr. Schmidt said. Then what? Bill prods. Then Mr. Vickers somehow managed to hit him in the face with the back of his head. I didn't see him do it because he was still on one knee at the time. Mr. Schmidt was standing over him and teasing him about Mrs. Vickers. Mr. Vickers then hit him with his fist right in the groin. Mr. Schmidt fell to one knee, and Mr. Vickers stood up. Mr. Schmidt continued to threaten Mr. Vickers and swear at him. Mr. Vickers then hit him in the face with his knee. Mr. Vickers said something that I could hear and turned to walk away. I turned around then and walked back to my desk. I wanted nothing more to do with what happened in the room. Thank you, Betty, Bill reassures her. When you returned to your desk, Mr. Vickers and I appeared just moments later? Betty nods. I think so. You two came in shortly after I sat down at my desk. Did he ask you about his wife coming into Mr. Schmidt's office around noon on Tuesday? Yes, it is, she replies. I'm about to object to this line of questioning from my own attorney when he informs Betty that these are all the questions he has for her. Bill turned to Christie. Is there anything you want to ask her? Christie looks at Tom, then at Bill, and shakes her head. She then thanks Betty and tells her that she can get back to her duties. Then, in what came as a shock to me, my lawyer briefly recounted what had happened at my house on Friday night and the hospitalization over the weekend. Christie and Tom were shocked. Christie, being the lawyer I was trained to be, quickly came to her senses and stated that what happened at my house was irrelevant, as it was a private incident and had nothing to do with the company. Bill alleges that both Schmidt and Hinckley conspired against me, that they used company resources to discredit me and commit criminal offenses, and subverted the human resources process itself to get me fired. In addition, Mr. Schmidt admitted to witnesses the day before that he did all of this using company resources and procedures in an attempt to gain sexual control over Mr. Wicker's wife. Thus, what happened on Friday night, even though it was my private residence, was simply a continuation of the criminal and civil violations that are generated within the walls of this firm. Bill then adds that he thinks any judge would agree with that argument and let the jury hear all the testimony. Finally, Bill asks Christy how she thinks all of this will play out in the court of public opinion. Christy then looks at Tom and asks him to excuse her and Mr. Weston for the 10-minute interruption. Once in the hallway, "Do you think they'll go for it?" asks Brad. "I don't see them having any choice. They know that if we go to court, the newspapers will just spread it around. That's not the kind of publicity a company like this needs. However, I don't think they'll settle for the full $10 million. After about 15 minutes, they both return to the room looking grim. Christy looks at me. "Jake, I can offer you a maximum of $6 million. That's the most they'll go for. And they also want you to sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement and a 2-year non-compete agreement like you offered." I look at Bill and smile. All we really wanted was $5 million, and I personally didn't care about the non-compete clause. I nod back at Christy and smile, reaching across the table for her hand to agree. After a few words between Christy and Bill, who needed to meet to work out the details, Bill and I leave the conference room and head for the elevators. "Mr. Vickers?" I heard behind me. Bill and I turn around and see Betty Higgins rubbing her hands together nervously. "Betty?" I inquired. "Is something wrong?" "Well," Betty says, "yes and no." "What is it, Betty?" "Does this refer to yesterday, when you asked me about Mrs. Vickers going into Mr. Schmidt's office?" Suddenly, the angry look on my face made Betty take a step back. Bill took a small step toward her and said, "Go on, Mrs. Higgins. What did you want to say?" "Well," Betty said, not knowing how to continue. "I wasn't surprised that you asked me those questions, Mr. Vickers, but I was surprised by the one question you didn't ask." I look at her in bewilderment. "You didn't ask me how long Mrs. Vickers was in his office yesterday. She locked the door, as I said, but she was only there a minute, maybe 2, no more, and when she came out, she looked very angry." I look at Bill, and he looks back. "Thank you for telling me about this, Betty. I apologize if I alarmed you," I tell her. "Is there anything else you'd like to share?" "No, Mr. Vickers. Well, yes. I'm sorry this all happened to you." "Thanks, Betty. I appreciate it." Bill and I watch as she turns and walks away. "So what?" asked Bill to me. "So what?" I ask in response. "Yesterday, when you found out that she went into his office, I could see that you had finally given up, and it was as if your heart had completely hardened against her. Now obviously nothing happened in that office yesterday, at least nothing sexual. Does that change anything?" asks Bill. I look at Bill for a very long time, and then I say, "Not a damn thing, Bill. Not a damn thing. When I heard those tapes from Tuesday, it was all over for me. I just haven't realized it yet." At that moment, the elevator bell rang and the doors opened. Bill and I stepped into the elevator, and I watched the doors close one last time for yet another aspect of my life. Thursday, 4:30 p.m. Once again, Bill and I are ushered into my wife's office. This time at their request, although truth be told, we would have asked for another appointment anyway. It was time to end this once and for all. I immediately notice that Susie looks much better than she did the day before, although she still has trouble looking me in the eye. After we sit down, Vicky says, "Jake, Susie has withdrawn her petition for divorce. She admits." Vicky interrupts the conversation as Susie takes her hand. "Jake," Susie says, struggling but still managing to look at me. "We have a lot to talk about. I have to tell you something that won't be easy. I've made some serious mistakes in this whole affair. I want to apologize to you. I need you to come home." I let out a very deep sigh. There's no easy way to say this to Susie. I can't do it anymore. I doubt I'll ever be able to forgive you, and I certainly won't be able to come home. Vicky is shocked, but I notice that Susie seems to have expected my response. "We filed for divorce," Bill says during a sudden lull, handing them copies of the lawsuit and the proposed agreement. "The settlement is direct in nature. All assets that were contributed to the marriage by both parties will be preserved. All assets acquired during the marriage will be divided 50-50. There will be no lump sum settlement payments or alimony. We understand that under Texas law, Miss Vickers is entitled to 50% of all assets, but we believe there are special circumstances that require a special settlement. It is not in the best interest of either party to bring all of the events of the past week to trial. Jake, what happened? Vicky says, stunned. Susie puts her hand on Vicky's arm to silence her. I realize that Susie still hasn't told her lawyer about anything she did with Schmidt. I'm done. Vicky, I say in a sour tone. Obviously, your own client didn't tell you what she was involved in, so let me give you a brief overview. I looked at Susie and she lowered her head, staring at her hands again. When I came home last Friday, after an absence of almost 2 weeks and the day before our anniversary, my wife seduced me and made me sit on a chair and let me tie myself up. My wife then proceeded to make love to my most feared adversary in a position just a few centimeters from my face. This humiliation apparently wasn't enough, as my wife demanded to do something else very nasty and disgusting. When I refused, she grabbed my testicles and twisted them. When I continued to refuse, she twisted my testicles so hard that I passed out. Vicky looks at me, then at her client, then back at me, her mouth seemingly open. Over the weekend, I regained consciousness in hospital, alone, and was told that I was lucky to have been able to keep one of my 2 testicles. I was told that the chances of preserving the second testicle were 50-50. Fortunately, just this morning, I was informed that the blood supply to that testicle is improving, and they believe that amputation will no longer be necessary. Oh my God, I heard Susie say, with a look of horror on her face. I ignored her, focusing on the lawyer. When I was released from the hospital, my wife handed me a seizure order on my own home. I discovered that all of our money had been taken out of our accounts, and all of my credit cards had been declared stolen. The next day, I was served with divorce papers and informed that the company wanted to fire me. Over the next 2 days, I gather enough evidence to completely destroy all the fabricated and fake evidence that has been gathered against me. As bad as this week has been, if nothing had happened, I would still be trying to save my marriage. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The 4 of us met on Tuesday, and in just 24 hours, we were able to present enough evidence to cast doubt on both the affidavit and the photographs. I realize that none of you can admit to this, but I know as well as you do that there are doubts brewing in your heads. Despite these doubts, I learned that my wife left this office on Tuesday night, where she met with my bitter adversary and made love to him in my bed in my home, as she had been doing with him for the past several days. I first found out about it Tuesday night. Every morning as I sat here this week, trying to convince my wife that all these allegations were false, she laughed at me, knowing. I look at Bill and nod. Bill reaches into his trusty briefcase and pulls out a cassette tape. This is a copy. It's a recording of Schmidt's phone call from my bedroom Tuesday night. I'll let you 2 listen to it at your leisure. But the gist of it is that he wants to share my ex-wife with a friend of his. Of course, if you still want to do that, I suppose you could call him. I look at Susie. Tears are rolling down her cheeks. For the first time since I've known her, tears don't make me feel anything. Turning to Susie, I ask, "Did you cry yesterday because his buddy was inside you, even as you listened to him set it all up?" I sigh. I'd done enough damage for 1 day. Bill and I should have left, but I couldn't leave it at that. I want to tell you 2 more things, Susie. First, you need to take a test. Schmidt makes love to anything that walks. Second, I will always love you, but I can't be with you anymore. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't understand how you could so easily believe I was cheating on you. I don't understand how you could betray me the way you did. I don't understand how you became so evil. I don't understand how you could continue to date Schmidt even after you had suspicions that I may not have been cheating on you. Is revenge so strong in your heart? A few nights ago, I sat in my hotel room thinking about all the questions that needed answers. I still have a lot of questions, but I don't care about the answers anymore. I think I finally realized the old saying, the one that says, dig 2 graves before you go out for revenge. Susie, you've buried us both. To be continued.